Okay, let's unpack this. We are opening up a truly remarkable historical and spiritual account today, one that, honestly, many of us just. We skip over it when reading through 2 Samuel or 1 Chronicles. It's the list of David's mighty men, the Haggadorim.
Right. Often treated like an appendix. But if you treat it that way, you miss the entire engine room of David's golden age.
The engine room, that's a great way to put it.
These weren't just names on a census list. These were the actual warriors who secured and then sustained the kingdom of Israel. They're the ones who allowed David to fulfill his role as God's anointed king.
So our mission, really, in this deep dive is to take this powerful, in-depth essay we're working from and draw primarily from 20 Samuel 23 and 4 Chronicles 11 to really explore the spiritual lessons here. We're talking about loyalty, courage, faith, this relentless dedication that these warriors embody. We need to look beyond the numbers and really see the men.
That's exactly right. They are the ultimate case study in dedicated service. We have to move past the bronze plaque, so to speak, and get onto the battlefield with them. Their lives give us such a powerful model of commitment, especially for us as thoughtful believers today. And the guiding principle for this whole discussion comes right from the source material we're looking at. It's quoting Proverbs 10:7. It says, "The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot."
Wow.
So we're seeking to honor the memory of these righteous warriors. We have to understand that their service to David, to the anointed king, was fundamentally service to God's plan.
I really appreciate that grounding. It's so serious and warm at the same time. It elevates this from just being military history to a genuine spiritual inquiry.
Yeah.
Now, when we look at the structure of the Haggadorim, the essay we're using clarifies that this was a highly organized system. It was broken into 3 distinct tiers based on, I guess, achievement and rank. It wasn't just one large, sprawling group.
That hierarchy is absolutely essential. You have to get that to understand their function and purpose. Think of it as concentric circles of dedication. At the very core, you have the 3.
The elite.
The absolute elite, yes. The highest-ranking warriors. They are the standard bearers, known for feats of bravery that almost defy belief.
Okay, and surrounding that elite core, what's the next circle out?
The second group, we have the 30. Now, these are the core group of dedicated soldiers, the mighty ones, and they form the bulk of what we might call David's special forces.
The 30.
But it's really important to remember, as the text notes, that their exact number fluctuated. It wasn't always 30.
Oh, that's interesting. Why is that?
Well, this was a rotating band of proven commitment. You have to deal with attrition from age, from injury, and of course from battle itself. So think of it as a dynamic list of sustained loyalty, not some static, unchanging roll call.
That makes a lot of sense. And then the 3rd tier. These are the individuals who distinguish themselves, but outside that core group.
We call them the additional notable warriors. These are figures like Benaiah and Abishai.
Ah, okay.
Top generals and commanders whose exploits were so significant they had to be recorded alongside the 30. But they often held administrative or command roles that placed them slightly outside that core fighting band.
So it's a different function.
A different function, exactly. And that distinction is key. It shows that this was a meritocracy. It shows a recognition of diverse forms of service to the king.
Okay, let's jump straight into that most elite tier then. Let's talk about the 3. This is where, as you said, the bar is set so high, it's almost impossible to even see. The source material suggests these men established both the spiritual and the physical standard for the entire army. They show us vividly how genuine faith and military skill have to work together on God's mission.
They absolutely do. Their feats are, well, they're almost mystical. But they're recorded so precisely because they illustrate divine enablement, coupled with this extraordinary, almost superhuman human dedication. These are testimonies of God working through people who they refuse to quit.
Okay, let's start with the chief of the captains, Josheb-Basshebeth. He's also known as Jashobeam. His legendary feat is often difficult to absorb. It says he killed 800 men in a single battle with a spear.
800 men?
What do we do with a number like that?
It forces us to pause, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We have to ask, is this hyperbole? Is this a literal count? But the essay guides us to understand the intent behind the number, whether it's literal or symbolic, the sheer scale of the opposition and the outcome. It's meant to show God working through a vessel of extreme dedication.
Okay.
It speaks to an unparalleled synergy of skill, of stamina, and of divine power.
So what does that level of singular devotion look like in practice? I mean, beyond just the battlefield.
Well, just think about the preparation for a moment. It requires absolute mental fortitude,
Yeah.
the ability to remain effective, to stay tactical, to be focused when you're facing what seems like insurmountable odds.
You'd have to be completely locked in.
Completely. It's a relentless, singular commitment. And the lesson here for us is that when we apply our developed skills, our spiritual gifts, our professional talents, whatever they may be, with total dedication toward God's defined mission, we become capable of achieving things that seem humanly impossible. It's skill that has been sanctified by purpose. Joshua-Basshepeth didn't just have a good arm. He had a completely consecrated life.
That reframes the number entirely, doesn't it? It's about consecration, not just carnage. Okay, next up in the 3, we have Eleazar, son of Dodai. And his story, for me, is almost more visceral than Joshua's numerical feat. It speaks so much to endurance.
It speaks to the human element, yes. The text tells us that Eleazar stood firm against the Philistines when the rest of the Israelite forces, they fled. They ran.
He was alone.
He was alone. And he fought for so long and with such intensity that his hand grew weary, the muscles seized up, and it literally stuck to his sword hilt.
I can just vividly imagine that scene, the fatigue, the pain, the loneliness of standing your ground when everyone else has run for the hills. It is the absolute definition of refusing to let go.
It truly is. And Eleazar's action, it highlights the importance of endurance and unwavering trust in God, especially when circumstances are just absolutely overwhelming.
Right.
The spiritual parallel here lands so deep. When we face spiritual battles today, doubt, anxiety, temptation, and we feel utterly spent, like our spiritual muscle is just failing us. Eleazar reminds us that the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to let go of the weapon God has given you.
The word prayer.
The word prayer, the truth. He stood his ground, and the Lord brought about a great victory through him simply because he was the last man standing.
His victory was a result of sheer, painful refusal to yield. And finally, in this top group, we look at Shammah, son of Agi. This is perhaps the most famous and certainly the most unique story among the 3. He defended a single field of lentils, not a city, not a strategic pass, just a field of common vegetables.
And that's the profound teaching moment of Shammah's story, isn't it? The lesson is that courage and steadfastness are necessary even in seemingly insignificant battles.
But why did this lentil field matter so much? It just seems strategically absurd to risk your life for lentils.
Now, on the surface, yes, but it represented valuable resources. It was the daily sustenance for the people. Or perhaps it represented the principle that David's kingdom was worth defending everywhere, not just at the grand strategic points. No ground would be ceded.
So there was a deeper principle at stake.
Exactly. Shammah showed that faithfulness isn't measured by the size of the task, but by the dedication we apply to it. If you and I are called to defend a small piece of truth in a casual conversation, or to serve faithfully in a humble, unglamorous area of our church or community, that is our lentil field. And we have to approach it with the same resolve Shammah had, knowing that God honors faithfulness, regardless of the scale. It forces us to ask, what small, vital thing is God calling me to defend today?
So, the 3. They established this almost impossible standard. You have unparalleled skill applied singularly, you have relentless endurance that refuses to yield, and you have steadfastness in duties both large and small. They are the exemplars.
They established the foundational standard of dedication for the rest of the kingdom, no question.
Let's use that as our transition then and look at the broader group, the 30. The essay emphasizes their fierce loyalty to David, their willingness to risk their lives. And as you mentioned, that constant fluctuation of the number due to attrition, it makes their sustained loyalty even more remarkable, doesn't it?
It really does. And within this larger group, we encounter this deep tapestry of dedication, but also diversity, and in some cases, real tragedy. Let's start with Asahel. He was the younger brother of Joab. He was renowned for his extraordinary swiftness. The scripture likens him to a gazelle in the field.
This speed must have been an incredible strategic asset, a real gift.
It was. But his story carries a really sobering reminder. It's one that the essay highlights concerning the price of valor. Asahel, driven by his speed and maybe some youthful zeal, he impetuously pursued Abner, who was Saul's commander.
Right, after a major battle.
Yes, and Abner warned him off, repeatedly. But Asahel just refused to break pursuit, and it led to his tragic death.
We celebrate their loyalty, but doesn't the story of Asahel suggest that David's army For all its faith, sometimes valued a kind of reckless valor over disciplined strategy. How does the source reconcile that tension?
That is such a critical question. His demise highlights the very real risks of impulsive bravery without strategic wisdom. True valor requires thought, it requires strategy, and it requires respect for the situation. It's a profound note.
So his gift became his downfall.
In a way, yes. The greatest risk for the strongest men isn't always the enemy, but our own lack of strategic discipline. Or maybe the arrogance that can come from a unique gift, like Asahel's speed. Asahel's death is a necessary inclusion in the list because it shows the human reality of military service. Even the fastest and bravest can fall when zeal outruns wisdom.
That's vital context to have. Now let's look at the background of some of these other men because the source really stresses the importance of where they came from in understanding their ultimate loyalty to David. Let's consider Abiezer the Anathothite.
Abiezer's origins, they transform his loyalty into this profound political and spiritual statement. He was from Anathoth, which was in the tribe of Benjamin.
Benjamin, that was King Saul's home tribe, a region that would have been, well, generally antagonistic toward David, especially early in his reign.
Precisely. So by choosing to follow David, Abiezer was breaking rank with his own tribal and regional history. He was swimming against the current.
His dedication, then, was an engine of reconciliation.
That's a great way to put it. His allegiance to God's chosen leader, David, transcended those tribal divisions. It actively helped to unify a fractured kingdom. It's a powerful lesson in corporate unity for us today. Our loyalty to the King, to Christ, must always overcome our internal divisions, our past conflicts, or even family loyalties if those allegiances conflict with God's plan.
And moving on to feats that directly reinforce God's power, we have Sibbecai the Hushathite. His exploit mirrored really the greatest moment in Israelite history since the Exodus.
Sibbecai is famous for slaying a Philistine giant. And this is so significant because it reinforced Israel's confidence that David's victory over Goliath wasn't just a singular miracle, isolated in the past.
It wasn't a one-off.
It wasn't a one-off event. God's strength was still manifesting through human vessels all across the army. Sibbecai symbolizes the continuation of God's deliverance. He proved that the era of giants was over for Israel, and it solidified their military strength under David. It cemented the belief that the Lord continued to fight for them.
The essay also discusses the powerful geographical diversity that's reflected across this list. It suggests David was intentionally building an army that represented the breadth of Israel, and that he valued the specific strengths that are forged by, well, by difficult terrain.
Indeed. You see the Herodites, men like Shammah and Elika, and the source connects the region of Herod to the well where Gideon famously thinned his army.
Okay. The 300.
The 300. This suggests that these warriors might have inherited a legacy of valor, one that was associated with profound trust in God's methods, even when they seemed unconventional. Then you have the Netophathites, like Marai and Heled, and they were known for providing skilled, committed soldiers who were locally rooted in David's vision.
And what about those forged by the most rugged terrains? I mean, how does geography translate into character?
Well, think of Hurai from the ravines of Gash. Ravines. That implies difficult, rugged, defensive terrain. That environment likely forged Hurai into a resilient, tenacious warrior, someone accustomed to hardship and highly skilled in perseverance and maybe strategic defense.
Right.
His service highlights that perseverance and a deep familiarity with one's own sphere of service or ministry are vital. Similarly, if you look at Abielbon the Arbathite, he hails from the arid Arabah desert. He would have possessed the kind of endurance and toughness that's essential for prolonged campaigns, for thriving under intense pressure. These geographical origins tell us something important. God uses the character forged in hard places.
It's a roster where origin itself dictates resilience. That's fascinating. But now we have to turn to what is maybe the most complex and painful part of David's inner circle, the moral complexity and the family connections that make this story so tragic. Let's discuss Iliam, son of Ahithophel.
This connection is profound, and we really must take the time to unpack it. Ahithophel was David's most trusted counselor. He was a man whose advice was compared to seeking an oracle of God.
The best of the best.
The best of the best. Yet he famously betrayed David, aligning with Absalom during the rebellion. The key link here is that Ahithophel's son, Iliam, was one of the 30, and he remained personally faithful to David, serving with distinction.
So Iliam chose personal integrity and loyalty to the king over his own father's treason.
Yes. His story is a powerful testament to personal integrity. It proves that an individual's faith and loyalty are not dictated by their family's moral failings. But here is where the tragedy deepens.
Okay.
Eliam was the father of Bathsheba.
Wait, Bathsheba was Eliam's daughter, and Uriah the Hittite was Bathsheba's husband.
That's it. That is the interlocking family dynamic that explains the profound moral weight of David's sin. Uriah, the foreign soldier who exemplified unwavering loyalty, was likely Eliam's son-in-law.
Wow.
So when David orchestrated Uriah's death, he wasn't just eliminating some distant soldier on the front lines. He was devastating a core family within his own Haggaborim.
He betrayed a loyal member of the 30.
Yes, and disgraced Eliam's family and planted the seed of this immense resentment in Ahithophel, who was already emotionally connected to both Uriah and Eliam.
So David's betrayal wasn't just a political or moral failure. It was a profound familial act of destruction against the very inner circle that sustained him. That context makes Ahithophel's later betrayal during Absalom's revolt entirely understandable. He was avenging the destruction of his family line.
It connects everything, and it makes Uriah the Hittite the most heartbreaking example of all the mighty men. Here's a foreigner who was fully committed to Israel and to David's rule. And his story is this sobering contrast. A man whose unwavering devotion, whose integrity, whose adherence to battlefield protocols, refusing to enjoy comforts while the ark was in the field.
Right? He wouldn't even go into his own house.
You wouldn't. And that faithfulness was met with the ultimate treachery by his king. Uriah's dedication remains an enduring, painful example of faithfulness violated.
And the fact that foreigners like Uriah and also Zelek the Ammonite and Igal from Zobah are listed among David's most trusted men, that also speaks volumes about the nature of David's kingdom.
It absolutely does. Zelek was an Ammonite, traditionally an enemy of Israel. Igal was from Zobah, a Syrian kingdom. These men, whether they were converts or mercenaries who just fully embraced David's cause, they demonstrate David's ability to unite profoundly diverse ethnic backgrounds under one divine purpose.
That's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal. Loyalty to God's anointed transcends ethnic or national lines. It sets an early, powerful example of inclusion and unity in God's broader plan. That devotion to the king matters more than where you were born.
So if we step back for a second and summarize the 30 as a whole, this group marked by such complex loyalty, personal drama, and profound diversity, what are the 3 core attributes that define their collective legacy?
The source we're using outlines them very clearly. First, unwavering loyalty. They stood by David through triumph and critically through hardship and exile. Second, extraordinary courage. They risked everything in seemingly impossible circumstances. And finally, faith in God's promises. They never attributed victory merely to their own strength or their weaponry, but always to the presence and deliverance of God.
That brings us powerfully to Section 3, collective feats. These men were far more than just individual heroes. They were an instrumental force in the strategic, the spiritual, and the administrative endeavors that secured the kingdom. And they helped fulfill God's promises for Israel. So what was their most significant early achievement as a group?
Strategically, nothing was more important than the conquering of Jerusalem from the Jebusites. The city was considered impregnable. It relied on its natural defenses, steep valleys on 3 sides.
The Jebusites even taunted David, saying the blind and lame could defend it.
Exactly. But David's forces, and we can be almost certain they were led by his mighty men, they infiltrated the city via the center. That's often understood to be the water shaft.
So that requires not just brute force, but tremendous ingenuity and nerve.
Precisely. It was victory of cleverness and extreme skill, not just raw power. And the significance goes far beyond just military conquest. By securing Jerusalem, they established the strategic capital that God had promised, the city from which the Davidic dynasty would rule, and where the central place of worship, the temple, would eventually be established. They were physically securing God's promised real estate.
Beyond securing the capital, they were also critical in dealing with the threat that had haunted Israel since Goliath, the giants. The source highlights the slaying of giants, recorded later in 2 Samuel 21.
This collective giant slaying is immensely significant. It's not just a collection of cool stories. We have specific examples. Sibbecai killing Saph, Elhanan striking down Goliath's brother, and Jonathan, who was David's nephew, killing the giant with 6 fingers and toes.
Right.
These acts reinforce a critical theological point. God's deliverance for Israel wasn't a singular one-off event with David.
It was an ongoing reality.
It was an ongoing reality. The mighty men collectively reinforced Israel's confidence that God was continually fighting for them. They were using their collective strength to dismantle the lingering power of the enemies they feared the most.
And we keep coming back to that defining quality of sheer endurance, the theme of holding the line, which seems to characterize their entire collective spirit.
It is their defining hallmark. When we revisit Eleazar's stand at Pas Damim or Shammah's defense of the lentil field, it reinforces this core identity, refusing to retreat even when logic tells you to.
It's an irrational commitment.
It is, and it was characterized by profound endurance and an unwavering belief that even when you're outnumbered, God grants the victory to those who stand firm in their faith and their duty. They understood something we often forget. The retreating in the face of the enemy, whether it's physical or spiritual, undermines God's promise.
But their service wasn't limited to glamorous battles and giant slaying. The essay also highlights their vital support roles and spiritual devotion.
These roles were the foundational acts of loyalty. You have to see these. Consider their essential role in guarding David during exile. This is back in 1 Samuel 22. Before he was king, they were the distressed, in debt, and discontented who gathered to him in the cave of Adullam.
They were outcasts.
They were outcasts, rallying to another outcast. They shielded him, often sacrificing their own comfort and their own safety, allowing him to survive and eventually fulfill his destiny as the anointed king. Their loyalty during hardship, when David had nothing to offer them but danger in a cave, that loyalty was foundational to the kingdom's eventual success.
Their dedication also extended into the national spiritual life, which is a facet we don't often think about for soldiers.
Absolutely. Their involvement in supporting the ark's return to Jerusalem, as recorded in 1 Chronicles, it underscores their integrated spiritual devotion. They participated in the transport of the ark, the very symbol of God's presence. This wasn't just a political parade. It was a religious ceremony that required reverence and care, ensuring the safety of this sacred object.
So they were security, but they were also participants in worship.
Exactly. It shows that their identity as warriors was inseparable from their identity as faithful Israelites who were committed to proper worship and to covenant keeping.
And finally, we should touch on those crucial leaders who served just beyond the 30, the ones who provided that organizational strength.
We must highlight Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He commanded David's personal bodyguard, the Cherethites and Pelethites. And he had his own incredible, daring exploits, killing a lion in a pit on a snowy day, defeating an Egyptian giant with his own spear.
The stuff of legend.
Truly. And Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, a fierce and loyal general. Their roles demonstrate the necessity of having a strong, reliable inner circle of leadership surrounding the kingmen, capable of high-level strategy and immediate personal protection. They were, you could say, the executive officers of the Hagiborim.
We've established the history, the names, the actions, both individual and collective. This is a good place to shift our focus. We need to move to the heart of this deep dive, the transition from historical valor to contemporary application. So Section 4, the spiritual legacy. How does this history inform our daily spiritual walk as thoughtful adult Christians today?
The connection has to be concrete. Otherwise, it's just an interesting history lesson. We are called to be spiritual warriors, and these men offer a timeless blueprint for commitment. And the first lesson is the core lesson of the essay: loyalty to God's anointed leader.
Okay, so the mighty men were fiercely loyal to King David, the earthly anointed king. How does that translate?
For us, that loyalty is fully transferred and really amplified toward Jesus Christ, the true and eternal King. Their example encourages us to stand firm in our devotion to Christ, never looking back or wavering. But we have to ask, what does that look like today? Modern looking back, like in Luke 9, where Jesus says, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service." It isn't necessarily abandoning the faith entirely. It often looks like cultural compromise. It looks like allowing distractions to erode our focus or prioritizing comfort and convenience over the king's demands.
So it's a subtle drift?
A very subtle drift. The mighty men show us a loyalty that was costly, it was uncomfortable, and it was ceaseless. That has to be our standard for Christ.
Next is the lesson of courage in spiritual opposition. Their challenges were physical, ours are spiritual. How do we make that parallel tangible for someone listening?
We have to first acknowledge the opposition we face. We face temptation, corrosive cultural pressures, skepticism, and our own inner battles with doubt and fear. The mighty men did not back down when the odds were stacked against them. For us, this means standing courageously, trusting God's strength.
Okay, but how?
The source points us directly to Ephesians 6, the famous armor of God passage. But it's not enough to just list the pieces of armor, We have to actively understand how we use them. The shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. These are not passive protections. They are instruments for aggressive standing. Like Eleazar, we have to refuse to drop the sword of the Spirit even when we feel utterly spent.
And that example of Shema defending the lentil field, it
Yeah.
so beautifully illustrates the third lesson. Faithful service in every
It
circumstance.
really does. Whether they were defending a strategic city or retrieving a simple drink of water for the king, a task they undertook at immense personal risk, the mighty men served with excellence. This teaches us the spiritual discipline of serving God in both the great tasks that garner recognition and the small tasks that seem completely obscure with the very same fervor.
It's all the same to God.
Exactly. Colossians 3 gives us the perfect framework. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Every humble act of service, caring for a neighbor, working diligently at a mundane job, patiently teaching a child, is an act of loyalty to the king. It's just as vital as defending a military capital.
And as we saw with the really diverse origins of the 30, they were a unified force. That brings us to the importance of brotherhood and unity.
They were men from rival tribes, Benjamin, Judah, various regions, and even from foreign nations like Ammon and Heth. Yet they worked as a unified force, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. This is the model for the church today, especially in an era that is marked by such intense political and social polarization, even among believers.
It seems like unity is harder now than ever before. How do these ancient warriors model unity for us when we are so divided over, well, over secondary issues?
They modeled the priority of allegiance. That's the key. They were unified around one person, King David, God's anointed. For us, that means our allegiance to Jesus Christ must so profoundly supersede any political party, any cultural preference, or even any secondary doctrinal interpretation that we can stand shoulder to shoulder with any true believer.
That's a high bar.
It is. The church is called to mutual support and unity for God's kingdom work. We have to recognize that we are all parts of one body, as detailed in 1 Corinthians 12. When one member is struggling or vulnerable, the others must stand firm to protect them.
And finally, the ultimate encouragement in their story, which I think is so important, is that God uses ordinary people for extraordinary purposes.
Absolutely. Think about Uriah the Hittite or Abiezer the Anathothite coming from rival territories. Many of these warriors were not born into nobility or predetermined greatness. They achieved legendary status through devotion, through perseverance, and through their profound trust in God's intervention.
So it's not about your starting point.
Not at all. This is the great equalizer in the spiritual life. The source directs us to 1 Corinthians 1, which emphasizes that God often chooses the weak and lowly things of the world to shame the strong. God uses anyone who is willing to step forward in faith and commitment, regardless of their background or their perceived status. We don't have to be a spiritual celebrity to have a powerful impact. We just need the devotion of Shammah in his lentil field.
This historical account of warriors really ends up being a profoundly detailed guide for contemporary Christian living. It's urging us toward intentionality and self-sacrifice. So let's move to Section 5, Practical Application. If we are to truly become these modern spiritual warriors, what are the tangible, concrete steps we can take today, based on their example?
Based on the lessons from these mighty men, the applications are direct and they're actionable. First, we have to cultivate vigilance and stand firm in spiritual battles. Just as Eleazar and Shammah refused to retreat physically, we must resist temptation and spiritual opposition the moment it appears.
And how do we execute that vigilance in daily life? What does that look like on a Tuesday afternoon?
It means using the Word of God as our primary weapon, memorizing it, meditating on it, and using it actively to resist deception. James 4 tells us to submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. This submission to God is our primary defensive posture, and that resistance is our offensive weapon. Vigilance means planning for temptation before it arrives, knowing our own weak points, and reinforcing them with God's truth.
We also have to prioritize that sense of camaraderie and support. We have to resist the temptation of isolation, which is so common today.
Precisely. We must actively support one another in the faith. Like the mighty men who worked together in the field and protected David in the caves of Adullam, we are called to strengthen and encourage our fellow believers. In an individualistic culture, this is so counterintuitive, but it's absolutely necessary. Hebrews 10 emphasizes the necessity of meeting together to spur one another on toward love and good deeds.
We can't do it alone.
We cannot fight this battle in isolation. Our community is our shield. When we see a fellow believer growing weary, we must remember Eleazar's fight and ensure they don't drop their sword.
And finally, a call to bold action, mirroring the daring exploits of the greatest heroes.
Be courageous in serving God. This means operating with boldness and commitment in every sphere of our life, in our ministry, in our workplace, or in the smallest decisions of integrity we make daily. We're reminded of Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.
That's the key, isn't it? His presence.
That promise of God's presence is what fueled David's mighty men to face giants and armies, and it must fuel our service today to face cultural opposition and personal challenges. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in the face of fear because of the certainty of God's presence.
This deep dive into David's mighty men has truly revealed that their legacy is an enduring inspiration. Their commitment, their willingness to take profound risks, and their unwavering faith in God's promises. It sets them apart. Their stories are not just historical footnotes, they are enduring challenges to our own level of dedication. Serving King Jesus with that same fervor, whether it's in great battles or in the quiet defense of our own lentil fields, is what defines true faithfulness.
And as we bring this reflection to a close, we return to the powerful verse that the source material leaves us with. It's a concise, powerful summary of all the qualities we've discussed. It's a timeless call to action for every believer. Be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous. Be strong.
That's from 1 Corinthians 16. It captures the very essence of the Hageborn, doesn't it? Vigilance, steadfastness, strength, and courage and devotion. It tells us the fight is worth the commitment.
May the Lord grant you, the listener, the unwavering strength of Eleazar and the singular devotion of Joshua-Basshebeth, and the courage to stand firm in the faith, serving our King Jesus with the same commitment and fidelity that characterized David's mighty men. Go and be strong in the Lord.